Hello, everyone. I'm Joseph Jutan. Just in case I don't know anyone here in the chat, I'm a career advisor with FIU, and specifically the Career and Talent Development Office. And today we're going to be talking about interviewing skills. And just thank you again to for requesting this special request. And I think we have a couple others throughout the rest of the semester. So unfortunately, it's just me from the office today. So I'll try my best to present and monitor the chat. So if anyone has any questions, just please feel free to drop those in the chat box and I'll jump in. And we should have enough time at the end for some Q&A. Or I'll skip this real quick. This is just our vision, mission, policy. Everyone is going to have the PowerPoint slides after. I'm going to send a PDF version, so you can look at this. And we're going to jump straight into the learning objectives for today. So after we finish talking about interviewing skills, you should know about career readiness competencies, importance of an interview, types of interviews, phases, and then just some outcomes there, 3 examples of different types of skills. So I'm pretty sure you guys probably have not heard of the term career readiness or organization called a NACE. NACE stands for National Association of Colleges and Employers, and it's basically an organization that was formed in order to identify 7 areas that employers look for when it comes to 1, internships, and number 2, entry-level jobs. And the key word there is entry-level, because I'm pretty sure you guys have seen job postings where it asks for 5 years of experience or experience doing ABC 1, 2, 3. But when it comes to career readiness and specifically these competencies, it is for internships and entry-level jobs. So there we have it: critical thinking, professionalism, teamwork, communication skills, digital technology, leadership, career management, global intercultural fluency. That's the newest one. And I'll briefly go through each one just because I believe that most of these are pretty straightforward. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to interrupt me or put that in the chat. But number 1, critical thinking, problem solving. If you guys are going into industry, meaning the private sector, at the end of the day, it's all about dollars and cents, shareholders, results, outcomes. So if you can position yourself, especially in the interview, as someone who's going to come in and problem solve and produce results and minimize losses, that's always going to give you a +1 over another candidate. Communication skills. Well, right here it says oral written communication. Written is for the resume, of course, and the oral communication is what we're going to be talking about today, which is the interviewing skills. Teamwork. Really, there's no industry where you're just by yourself. You're always going to be working with others, especially in engineering groups. The culture is usually group work or teamwork, so that's super important. Digital technology, so software that relate to the field or the position. I think for biomedical, it's things like MathCAD. Of course, everyone has to know about Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. But if there are any other technology for your field, that is something to be aware of and to know how to use when it comes to this competency. Then we have leadership. So not only being able to take direction, but also being able to give direction. So being able to be flexible in that way is always going to be an advantage. Work ethic, whatever you consider to be good work ethic for you personally, and whatever that employer establishes as good work ethic for them. Career management. So this is you're going to be verbalizing or pitching your skills in an interview. So just being aware of your strengths, your skills, what you've done, and how that relates to the position that you are applying and interviewing for. And global intercultural fluency, meaning being able to work with people from other backgrounds, races, countries, ethnicities. So that's just kind of taken into scope that it's not just the US, it's just in the entire world, consistently. I think those are pretty, not too confusing there. And then we are going to start with interviewing basics. So here are a couple different interview structures. I would say these are probably the more common ones. Just from a glance, you guys probably, recognize a couple of these. But the first one-on-one, it's usually the most common interview style. And it's usually, I'll kind of come back to this part, but that one, the one-on-one, usually starts with the phone interview or the screening interview. So they'll be asking you questions back and forth, but that's just with another person. The panel interview, of course, it's going to be a panel of interviewers. It could be 2 recruiters. It could be 3 recruiters and an engineer. It could be just the engineers, but 3 or 4 people asking you questions. Some might not even ask any questions. It might just be the recruiter, and the engineer or maybe another employee is there just to take notes, and then obviously they're going to have a discussion after to discuss what you said. Group interviews, haven't seen this one as much with engineering students, but I have seen it now and again. It's usually where it could be a panel interview where you have 4 employers. It could even just be one recruiter. But the main thing is that it's a group of candidates. So it might be 2 candidates, 3, it could be 4. And the technique the reason why employers use this style of, or the structure, is because it really pulls the best answers from candidates. Because if you have, for example, 4 people interviewing for a position, the first person to answer the question, the pressure is on them to kind of set the tone for the rest of the answers. The number 2 answers, number 3 answers, and then number 4 is in a very, I wouldn't say difficult situation, but they're in a situation where they have to one up everyone else who answered before them. But at the same time, they're in a good spot because they have 3 different responses so far to pull from. So it really gets the best answers from candidates. It's kind of like a stress type of interview, but just be prepared. That could be something you may come across. There's the meal interview where you get, called, and then you go to the, usually after the first round interview, you go to the employer's, the site or wherever they set that interview up for. And it's either over breakfast, lunch, dinner. The main thing I told students, if you get invited to a meal interview, is that you're not there to eat. So don't order messy food like spaghetti, pizza, chicken wings, because you're there to sell your skills and your experiences to the employer and not there to eat food. And then the second thing is, do not by any means order any, alcoholic beverages, because again, that would be, not to say it's going to disqualify you if you order a drink at the interview, but the employer or the recruiter is going to be looking at how you change, how your answers change if you do order, an alcoholic beverage. Sometimes they will order wine, but I would recommend 100% that you should not order alcoholic drink. You could order the virgin version, but no alcohol, and stay away from messy foods. There's the working interview. I see this one a lot with computer science and IT students, where they will come in for the interview, and usually there's like a whiteboard activity. So the employer will be there, a recruiter, sometimes a programmer, and they give you a problem or some code to solve, and you have to work through how you would solve this issue or whatever, or how you would code this technical thing. And the thing with this is, most candidates get very focused on, I need to get the right answer, and that's not the point of a working interview. They're there to see or observe how you solve issues, how you solve problems. So usually when it comes to this type of interview style, if you are not sure, even if you are sure how to solve it, make sure you verbalize your thought process. And if you're not sure, you get stuck on something, don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions or ask the recruiter, what do you think about this? If I do this, this might be the result, and they won't just stay silent. They more times than not will help walk you through it. The main thing is they're there to see how you think and how you solve problems. It doesn't always have to be like a coding thing specifically for computer science IT students. It might be something else depending on if you're mechanical, biomedical. I haven't seen it with biomedical yet. I'm not sure if any of you guys here today are familiar with that, but just something to keep in mind. There's a phone or video interview. And yeah, like I mentioned in the beginning, that's usually the first contact that the employer will have with you interview-wise. So they'll call, they schedule the interview, and the first round interview or the phone interview is a screening interview, like it says, and they're asking questions like, tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in this position? What do you know about the company? What do you know about the position? So they're just, kind of screening to see if they want to bring you in for a second round interview, which is the next one. Because if you don't remember the company name, you're unprepared in that first, screening interview, they will usually, kind of scratch you off, or, you're not in the running anymore. So don't make that mistake of not being prepared for the first round interview. And then the on-site or second round interview, I know right now we are remote with COVID. Some employers may be doing social distance second round interviews, but from my knowledge, most employers are keeping it virtual. So even if you have a screening interview, the questions are going to be a second round interview questions. Can you guys hear me? I got the message. My internet is unstable. Am I good?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, there was maybe like a couple of seconds where you've been iffy, but you're stable now.
Okay. Yeah. If that happens again, don't chat, or you could unmute yourself. Let me know. That's been an issue with Zoom. But yeah, so those are the types of interview structures. And then we're going to talk about the types of interview questions next. That first one, behavioral interview questions, super important for engineering students. So whether it is biomedical, mechanical, civil, electrical, behavioral interview questions are what most of these employers use for these types of questions. And like it says, they're experience-based. They, give you a scenario. I'll kind of go through a couple of these in a minute, but the next one is situational. So they might ask you a hypothetical type question. A behavioral interview question could be a sub of a situational question. Things like, what would you do if? And then the background interview questions, those are focusing on what you've done, your projects, your senior design, any past internships you might have had. Don't rule out your past work experience, even if it's not related to engineering. Because let's say, for example, you worked at Ross or you worked at, Macy's, you might be thinking that isn't really something that an engineering employer is going to be interested in. And that's not true or necessarily true. Because as we kind of go back to the NACE career readiness competencies I talked about in the beginning, and especially for the term entry level and internships, when you're going into, let's say, for example, an entry level biomedical position, you're not going to have 5 years of experience working on this, working on that, because it's an entry level job. So if an employer sees, let's say, for example, on your resume, or they ask you in an interview about let's say the biggest thing they're asking for is a team player, and you worked in teams at Ross or you worked in teams at Macy's, and the way you worded it on your resume and the way you answered those questions in the interview really sent the message that you are a team player, then they're going to be confident you're going to bring that same competency or that same skill into this entry level job. So never rule out any types of experiences, even if they aren't related to engineering. Research experience, projects, internships, work experience, I think I said volunteer, involvements, clubs that you're involved with, leadership positions, all relevant experiences to sell to an employer in an interview. The technical interview, we talked about that, technical questions. They may ask you, well, compared to the first one about they give you a problem to solve, they might ask you technical questions in the interview related to your degree, or let's say for biomedical. So they might they may ask you to explain a concept that you learned in class regarding certain things. If it's for an internship and the internship revolves around that type of thing, and you would need to know about that theory to, do that position or do that internship, that could be an interview question. Don't be hesitant to use technical language or verbiage in the interview, kind of being like afraid or hesitant to, you're not going to know what that means. Even if the recruiter is not from a technical background, since they are recruiting for engineering, they know enough to understand that, certain things that might come up in the interview. And like I said earlier, sometimes they'll have an engineer with them in the interview who is there for that specific reason. So it always makes you look good as well if you kind of, gas yourself up and use a technical language. Don't dumb anything down. Go all the way in when it comes to those types of questions. Quick case questions, almost like behavioral as well. They might give you a situational type question, almost like what would you do if. So behavioral, situational, case, kind of all the same thing. And then stress, they may ask you something ridiculous like, how many golf balls can you fit in a limousine, or something like that. Obviously, you're not going to know how to answer that type of question. And the main thing, at least from the employer perspective, is they want to see how you handle these types of questions under stress. So if you can kind of hold your own and walk through or guide yourself through that type of question, they're going to be confident you're going to have that same demeanor in the actual internship or in the entry level job, or even if it's not entry level, it doesn't matter. But the best way to answer the stress questions is to ask clarifying questions. Tell them what you would do. Something like, if it's a golf ball question, I would have to know the dimensions of the limousine. I'd have to know if the seats are still in there or are the seats removed, the type of golf ball, the weight, the dimensions, like just kind of walk them through all that stuff. And they're already thinking this person is problem solving oriented, which is one of the biggest competencies that they look for, right? And then there's the puzzle type interview question, almost like stress. They might give you, or like a technical question, but something just for you to get a good idea of how your brain works, how you think, and how you ultimately problem solve. So these are the most common types of interview questions. Right, now we're going to jump into the interview phases. This is supposed to be 1, 2, 3. I don't know if I got it. I have to fix that. But there's a pre-interview phase, the interview phase, and the post-interview phase. And for the pre-interview phase, that is everything you do before an interview. And honestly, it's the biggest phase when you are job searching or internship searching. So things like, of course, the resume, applying for the job, your cover letter, attending conferences, career fairs, networking events, info sessions, just doing as much as you can to secure the interview. So the thing with the pre-interview phase is it really sets a tone for the rest of the phases there, interview phase and post-interview phase. And it's all about preparation and just putting in all the work. Sometimes students get roadblocked or they kind of do everything they're supposed to do except, actually applying for the jobs. I'm not sure if it's, if it's because it's hitting home like this is like the next step is actually for me to apply for these positions and to get callbacks for interviews, but just all that stuff ahead of time. Your LinkedIn is super important right now. It was before COVID, but after COVID, a lot of employers have been, scouring LinkedIn profiles and also your Handshake profile. So make sure, just how Facebook you can set private, friends of friends, all these steps to how private you want your stuff to be. When it comes to LinkedIn, I always recommend make sure that profile is public for any and anyone to view. You want to remove as many roadblocks as you can, especially for an employer. So make sure it's 100% complete. Have your professional picture there, just so it's easy access for them to reach out to you if they need to. Then there's the interview phase. So of course, everything we've been discussing so far, the type of interview, the interview questions, the structure, so that's you one-on-one with that employer, with those or with that panel, so that's the actual phase. And then the post-interview phase is the follow-up part. And I'm going to get a bit more in detail with a couple of these, but just to kind of give you guys an overview of the three different phases. Yeah, so they put this meme in here from Game of Thrones. Prepare yourself, interviews. You guys are in a really good position when it comes to being an engineering student right now with the pandemic. If there are any jobs, there's always going to be jobs for STEM. So it's business as usual. Don't feel like you have to do anything differently per se compared to before COVID. Everything we're going to discuss is what you should be doing. But for the most part, jobs are secure for engineering students. So preparation increases your confidence, demonstrates professionalism, shows interest. Don't make the mistake of not preparing, because when it comes to interviews, the biggest reason why many people get nervous or start tripping over their words or sweating, all that stuff, is because they did not prepare beforehand or they didn't prepare enough. So the best way to prepare for an interview is to, number one, study that job or internship description. You should know exactly what this employer is looking for. You should almost have it memorized, because when it comes to the interview, the master document to help you prepare for it is the job or internship description. So when you apply for those stuff on Handshake, LinkedIn, Indeed, Monster, company-specific websites, internships.com, LinkedIn, make sure you save the job or internship description, because a lot of the times employers will have the position disappear after the expiration date. And you don't want to be in a scenario where, the interview is next week, the job expired 2 weeks ago, you go on the website, you try to find it to prepare, and it's gone. That's going to make you super nervous. So definitely that is going to help you prepare. Second way to best prepare is to document your steps. Make sure you write down how many jobs you applied for, the job ID number, who you spoke to. If you're good with Excel, that's a really great way to track everything. If you'd rather have a journal or using like the Notes app on your phone, because if you apply for 2 or 3 jobs, you could remember those 3 jobs. But when you really start getting into it and applying for 15, 20, 25, it's going to get hard for you to remember every single job or internship you applied for by memory. All right. So just kind of find a very efficient way to track everything. Gather as much information as you can from the job description or internship description. And when you get the callback for the interview, or if they email you, just make sure you have all of this information ahead of time, so you don't have to worry about this the day off or the day before. So who you spoke to, what to bring, the type of interview, if they're willing to tell you that beforehand. And sometimes they won't. Sometimes they will tell you the name of the interviewer, sometimes they don't know. But as much information as you can is going to help you be prepared. All right. And definitely a mock interview with a career advisor is one of the best ways to prepare for interviews. You can book as many mock interviews as you want. Usually how I do it is I would want you to send me a sample job or internship, or if you actually applied for something, send it to me. And then I tailor those questions based on the skills that the employer is looking for. So we'll pretend like it's a real interview. I ask the questions, you respond, and I give you feedback after each question. That's how most advisors carry out their mock interviews. And then also, before I move on, the one of the best ways to reduce nerves and to be prepared is experience. So the more interviews you have, like actual interviews with actual employers, the more you're going to learn, the better prepared you're going to be for the next one. You'll know what you did well, what you didn't say so well, what you can improve on, and then you kind of bring that back to the career advisor and we practice some more. That's really how you get better at interviewing. So maybe your first interview ever for an internship or entry-level job, you're super, super nervous. But then when it gets to your 10th, 15th, you've done it so many times ahead of before, you have all this experience to pull from. And then, of course, you'd already have had mock interviews. You're not going to be as nervous as you were in that very first one. So just a tip there when it comes to preparing for interviews or just nerves in general. All right, so self-assessments. Well, it should be singular, self-assessment. You really have to kind of think, or reflect on what you want, your short-term goals, your long-term goals. And most of these questions or these points I have here relate to usually the screening interview. So you shouldn't go into an interview and really not know how your background or your skills relate to the position. If they ask you a question like, what's your biggest strength and your biggest weakness? You give the impression that's the first time you're ever trying to think of that. You should know what your strengths and your weaknesses are. And those strengths should relate specifically to the position. So if you apply for company A, your strength for company A is going to be different than the strength for company B. All right. So if, say, for example, company A is looking for a team player and you tell them that your strength, your weakness, let's say, is that sometimes you would rather work on your own and not with others. That's almost like you're off the running already. So just being very reflective and thinking about these things are going to help you, especially the work values, personal values. If a company stands for something or they're in an industry that you don't necessarily agree with, or they support, something that you don't, I would assume you would want to work for them. So just kind of being aware of what you stand by and if that aligns with what your employer stands by. That one right here, understand salary ranges for your field and your experience. Make sure you are prepared for this. It is one of those questions that they ask to see if they can save money. So if an employer asks you, how much are you expecting to get paid for this full-time entry-level job? And let's say that position normally pays 60,000 and you didn't do your research and you kind of just in the moment threw out maybe 50, they're not going to say anything. They're going to keep the interview going. And if you are the best candidate for the position and they send you the job offer, 100% that job offer is going to say 50,000. Because if you're comfortable with 50, why would they give you 60? And then you're in an awkward situation where you have to try or you would want to negotiate and they could come with the argument. But in the interview, you said you would have been comfortable with 60. So what's the change with 50? So what's the change now for 60? It's nothing personal. Businesses are in the business of making money. And if they can cut costs in different areas when it comes to anything, even people's salaries, they will. So definitely be prepared with that question. LinkedIn salary calculator is really good for that. Also Glassdoor, I'm pretty sure you guys have heard of that. And also the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have a website. You can really research what different companies pay in different cities, different roles, whatever. Because a position in Miami, the exact same position with the exact same employer in Miami is going to pay different than the exact same position in Charlotte, North Carolina. So just research. It's all preparation. Assess your regions. I kind of just touched on this. Are you willing to relocate? Because I've run into this a lot with students from Miami who don't want to leave the general vicinity. Not even as far as Fort Lauderdale. Not so much with engineering students. I think you guys are really good when it comes to going where the opportunities are. But if you have an amazing interview, you're the top candidate, but you're not willing to relocate to Chicago, for example, there's nothing that the employer can do. So just know exactly if you or think about that to see if you are willing to go where the opportunities are. Right? Because you might not even find, sometimes if you want to stay in a certain area, you might have to look for a slightly different type of position or one that might not even be in your field. Or if it's in your field, it pays substantially less compared to if you went somewhere else. So just some things to think about and always have a 2 to 5 year career plan and goals. All right. A couple of things I kind of touched on these a couple. I won't spend too long on it, but research the employer, understand their vision, mission, goals. Because if you go into the interview, let's say, and an employer had a really great week or month in the stock market, the shares are through the roof, it was on the news, it was everywhere, and you are not in the know and you're clueless about that stuff, that's not going to be a good look. Not to say you need to know about shares and stocks, dividends, all that stuff, but if you didn't know that the company had this big achievement or they're known for this or whatever, it's going to look bad because it shows that you're not prepared. You didn't prepare enough. Know who their subsidiaries are, their competitors, just depending on the industry, the company. I know it's kind of broad. It's going to be different for each one of you, but you need to know all of those things. Also, you're in a good position if, let's say, for example, two companies are competitors and you have interviews with both. That's a really good talking point, especially if company A offers you the position where you really want to work for company B. That's the salary negotiation piece. We have a whole workshop on that part. You could also book an appointment if you're in that situation or if you want to know more. But that's what this bullet point is kind of getting into. You have to know who their competitors are. Know the position, requirements, skills, responsibilities. Again, all of that is from the job description or the internship description. Is there room for growth? How fast do you want to kind of move up? Is it something where you want to stay in a certain level for a certain amount of time? Usually you could find all of this stuff from your research. So if you go on the employer's website, look up like their staff list, or if you see like what the positions look like, that's also even a good question to ask in an interview, but just research. And then I have here LinkedIn, company website, social media, professors, colleagues, professional associations own it. I didn't put Twitter in here. That's also really good for employers. And the thing with like all these social stuff is because of the pandemic, they're really making use of, LinkedIn, like I said, Twitter, Instagram. So just pull from as many resources that are available. It's never going to be something where, it's a waste of time. It's all preparation, right? So that's this part for researching the employer. Really quick, just Own It Online and Vault are really good. Specifically, Own It. So if you go on Own It Online and you type in biomedical engineer, mechanical engineer, you could see the job outlook, whether it's like a declining field or if it's green, like it's growing, the type of work. So that's a really great website if you're looking to learn more about your specific major or your industry. And then next slide is practice. So have that meme there from The Matrix. I think everyone in here is old enough to remember The Matrix. That's from my time. But amazing movie if you haven't seen it. Had Matrix 1, 2, and 3. And then, we just kind of put this in. So practice is really what helps you. Again, I've kind of harped on that a bit. Have your resume critiqued. This is before the actual interview. Of course, you could have your resume critiqued with me, a career advisor. You could have it with a faculty member, family, friends, maybe someone who actually works in the field. But just remember, when it comes to resume critiques, you're always going to get a different opinion on that critique. Not to say that my opinion is better than this person's opinion, but resumes are subjective. But at least from the career perspective side or career services side, when I give you a critique or when a career advisor gives you a critique, it's always in mind with what that employer is looking for or what that industry prefers. So my recommendations for engineering students are different than my colleague Lauren, who works for Stemple Public Health. Her critiques are always going to be related to what employers prefer in the public health field. So just a tip on that part, but definitely a critique by a career advisor or someone in the field that you are looking to get into is going to be beneficial. Have a story to share about each point on your resume. Usually what happens is in the interview, the questions sometimes will relate to past experiences that you've had. So if it's something about your senior design, past internships, even if it's about that position you had at Macy's, just remember that employer is trying to probe or learn more about what you did, your skills, and to see if that would be transferable to the position that you are interviewing for, right? Be able to describe and quantify key points on your resume and cover letter. Extremely important for engineering students. I always push for numbers, outcomes, results on the resume, also in the interview. But before I get to the interview part, at least on the resume, if you have something where, instead of just having worked in a team, it's something like worked in a team of 4 to accomplish ABC 1, 2, 3, which resulted in 5, 6, 7 over 8, 9, 10. So that really puts you in the critical thinking, problem solving. It puts you in a results-driven or outcomes-driven position. And then being able to even expand or expand on that some more in the interview verbally. I mean, that's always gonna, you're gonna always stand out compared to someone who doesn't. So results, outcomes, those are really important parts to consider for engineering students. Have those mock interviews, like I said. We could have the first round interview, we could have behavioral interview questions. I can't really help you with the technical part because I'm not an engineer. So, but you guys should know that stuff from your classes, the actual knowledge. The advice I give is how to verbalize that information to an employer just so that they understand. All right. Practice answering common interview questions so that you're comfortable sharing stories, but don't sound like a recording. Of course, do not 100%. All right. So when it comes to the first round interview, I normally recommend you can have notes with bullet points. Do not have paragraphs because you're going to want to read the paragraph and you're going to sound like you're reading, even if you've practiced it to make it sound like you're not reading. So you should always, your tell me about yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses. Those answers are always going to sound slightly different, even though the content is the same. So don't record anything, just practice it. And it's always going to sound slightly different each time. And then of course, if you have notes, bullet points, 3 words at most, not even 1 sentence, because you're going to want to read the whole sentence. So just some advice there. So the interview phase. So this is kind of going straight now into like having that face-to-face or virtual face-to-face with the employer. So first impressions, all right? Let's say we go back to some sort of normalcy in the future. Could be next year, could be the year, I don't know when. But if it's in person, I'll also talk about the virtual piece. Arrive early, all right? Don't do Miami time. Make sure the day before, a couple of days before, you go on Google Maps and look up exactly where this place is. Google Street View, you could walk up and down the street, turn the corner. I prefer to recommend going in person so you know exactly what to expect, because sometimes what happens is the Google Maps isn't updated and then you start taking that route the next day and it turns out that there's a detour, there's construction or something like that. And that's not what you want to be worrying about the day of the interview, especially if you leave late or even if you leave on time, because Maps said that it's going to take 20 minutes because of the detour, it's going to take 40 minutes. So don't get caught in that situation. If it's something where the interview is, like in a different city, a different state, obviously you can't go there ahead of time. But, Google Maps would be good for that part at least. And let's say you're in a hotel or whatever, you could always, take an Uber or something a couple of days before, unless the interview is the day before the actual date. But definitely prepare as much as you can that way. Make sure you take a portfolio, resumes, the resume you actually use to apply, the cover letter, take your transcripts. Unofficial transcript is fine, unless they ask for official transcript. That would have to be through your My FIU account, and I think it gets mailed or something, and you have to pay. But usually most employers ask for unofficial transcripts, like a PDF version. If it's something where you have work samples or projects, like a binder or something, that's always good. If you have a ton of projects and you have something like a GitHub or a link to a website that has everything in detail, make sure that's on your resume. And then you could also take a list of recommendation, references, just stuff that you may need or you may not need, but you don't want to be in the situation, of course, where you need it and you don't have it. Always take extra resumes where you're going to have leftovers, at the end. You don't want to run out. They ask for a resume and you gave your last one to the front desk or something. Be polite to everyone. Interview starts when you arrive and ends after you depart. So even if don't have road rage or anything the day of the interview, because you never know. I've had it where it kind of worked out that way where, the person was late for the interview and they cut off someone and flipped them off. And that person was a panelist on the interview. So never just kind of let them cut you off. Just try and be relaxed, but be very polite to everyone. The parking attendant, the receptionist, because they all talk. They will ask the recruiter. The recruiter will ask people, how was, this person when they came in? Were they polite? Were they rude? So just be on your best when it comes to the day off. And I hope you guys can see this. I wonder if I have a zoomed in version. No, I don't. Okay. So this is basically common nonverbal mistakes that people make. And of course, this is in person. So obviously they're not going to see all this stuff over Zoom or Skype, whatever, but they're going to see at least your head and the top half of your body. So make eye contact. I usually recommend, if you are answering a question, don't look at them in the Zoom window because it looks like you're looking at the screen. You want to look at the camera, but don't really kill yourself over that, because sometimes it's because you want to look at the person's face when you're answering a question compared to just looking at the camera. But it's just something to keep in mind. Make sure, I won't read through all of this stuff, but just some statistics here. 55% look at the way you dress. Biggest thing from this or takeaway is make sure you have on full professional attire from head to toe. Don't half do it where it's just up to your waist, pajama pants, and then you got everything else professional waist up, because it really puts you in the mindset to interview and to sell your skills and your experiences to an employer. it sounds dumb. Make sure the belt is matching the same color, like for guys at least, belts, shoes, same, just put everything on the socks. Same thing for females or women, just kind of go all out and just be very, very well put together for the interview, even if it is virtual, because if you're only halfway there professionally, you're going to be halfway there mentally. I even before the pandemic, I used to do it for my interviews, not mock interviews, but my first round interviews over the phone or even over Skype, because it really helped put me in a mental space to sell my skills and my experiences to the employer. And you might have to stand up or jump up. Sometimes employers, can you stand up so I could get a good look of, what your suit that looks like a nice jacket, a nice tie. Can I see the full thing? Then you're like, oh, you can't tell them you're only halfway there. So don't be in that situation. Just kind of go all out professionally, or, your clothes. This one's, I forgot to talk about this, but don't wear stuff like this in the bottom right, like the neon orange suit, lime green shirt. That's not what you want to stand out for in the interview. The main takeaway is that the employer should be impressed with your experiences, your background, and not what you're wearing or how you look. So the main thing is keep it conservative. So this, I'm going to go into, I don't like to go into or discuss attire so much, because there's just so many, the spectrum is so wide. I know, for example, Microsoft, Google, they don't want people coming to interviews in suits or in professional attire. They want you to come in jeans or casual clothes. So, but just in general, when it comes to interviewing, this is something that at least for men, I'll go over to the women, the female one in a bit, but conservative, two-piece, jacket, tie, pants, everything matching. I think it's pretty standard for men. And then for women, I guess these two pictures are good examples of that. Usually when I don't have my co-host with me today, Lauren, she usually talks about this a bit more in depth because she has a different perspective. But I would say something like this, like a two-piece suit or a skirt. I've heard that, a skirt past the knee or right by the knee is good. I personally, I don't care too much about that part. But again, the main thing is conservative, at least when it comes to women and also for men. So here are a couple of common questions that you could get asked. Let me see, I'm doing 15 minutes. All right. So tell me I won't read through all of these, but these are very common interview questions that most employers ask in either a screening interview or a first round interview. That first one, tell me about yourself, is the most asked, guaranteed. I've never seen an interview where that wasn't the first question they asked. So it's the most asked question and the least prepared for. All right. So don't get caught in a situation where you're not prepared for that question, because you should see it coming. And I'll give you guys some tips on how to answer that. I think I have it in another slide. But some other ones here: describe your ideal supervisor, strengths, weaknesses, organizational style, short-term goals, long-term goals. So these are really good to practice with. Some tips for answering the tell me about yourself position. I know there's a lot of words on this slide. I won't read through these, but basically when it comes to the tell me about yourself question, what's worked for me personally and what's worked for most of my students is a past, present, future context. So nothing personal, how many siblings you have, where you're from, your race, none of that comes into this. They're only concerned about the professional aspect of your life. So when I say past, present, future, it's all relating to the position that you are applying or interviewing for. So what you've done, projects, past internships, jobs, you're not going through a laundry list of every single thing. You're given the most relevant positions or experiences as it relates to what you're interviewing for. And then when you get to present, the fact that you are currently pursuing your major in, let's say, biomedical engineering, you plan to graduate in December of 2021. Right now, you're looking for an internship for summer of next year. That's going to help you develop and grow and whatever. Just, it's always going to sound different. And then future could be something relating to the internship or to the job. I saw this position posted, and it really aligned with my professional interests and my goals to do this or to do that. So it's just a really good framework to work with. And again, it's always going to sound different for each employer. And even if it's for the same employer, every time you practice that, tell me about yourself, it's going to sound different. Never write that down, in paragraph style. All right. So that's a good way to answer that. And I think there was another one. I think it's called NEWS, the NEWS acronym. But the one I always recommend is past, present, future. Here's this one about why are you best qualified candidate for the position? Of course, always gas yourself up through the roof. Do not be timid or play your experiences or your past on, because we live in an individualistic society. It's different in the East, where they're more collective. So they're going to be more humble about certain things in interviews. But at least for the West, you should always be pushing or pitching your skills in the best way you can, because if you aren't 100%, someone else is going to be doing it. So you don't want to put yourself at a disadvantage. So the best way for you to know how you're the best qualified candidate is connecting your skills and your experiences with what they have listed in the internship description or in the job description, or what you've done on your research for that position. Here is the STAR technique that is super helpful for behavioral interview or situational-based questions. The thing with the questions that we've looked at so far are questions you should know ahead of time. You should see them coming. But the thing with behavioral or situational is sometimes you never know what they're going to ask. And you might be in an interview and that's the first time you've ever heard that question. But if you are practiced with the STAR technique, you're going to be able to answer it even if you've never heard that question before. So situation, task, action, result. A very common STAR or behavioral interview question is, tell me about a time when you worked or let me not use that one. Tell me about a time when you worked on a project and something went wrong. What steps did you take to solve the issue? Very common problem-solving behavioral interview question. So you would start with S for situation. Always give context. You're getting into detail, just as much information as the recruiter needs to know to understand the rest of your answer. T for task, you're actually describing what you needed to do, what you and your team members needed to do, just more details. And then A for action, what you actually did. So we did this, we did that. I was assigned to do this, and we did, it kind of worked around this. Just as much, details with it when it comes to action as well. And then always remember results. A lot of students forget. They always do the STA, and then the recruiter is left hanging. So was it successful? Did it fail? Did you win an award? So always remember to tie up your answer with results. And the general takeaway from the STAR technique, or what I've seen, especially in mock interviews with students, is there is not enough detail in many students' answers. Just go all. You don't want to skip anything or be too vague. Just throw in as much technical language as you can, as much context, as much detail. So after you finish doing that with the STAR technique, the recruiter should be close to 100% confident that you have the skill and the experience to support that. So if it was a problem-solving question, if it was a teamwork question, attention to detail, based on the example you gave what you did, and what was the outcome of that example, they're going to be pretty sure you're going to bring that same skill or qualification into the position you are interviewing for. There's some information on the STAR technique. I won't play this video. I'm not sure if you guys have questions for me. We'll put 10 minutes, but you'll have this. It's just a clip from the internship movie of how not to answer interview questions. So definitely take a look if you guys have time. But if you don't know how to answer, always take a minute to think. You don't have to jump straight into the answer. I know there's that pressure that as they finish asking, you need to start responding. You could ask, oh, that's a good question. Can I have a minute? Or if you're not sure, you could ask clarifying questions. Don't BS anything unless you're a good BSer. I'm not, because it makes you very nervous when you start making up stuff on the spot. Some people are good at that, but I would never recommend it generally, because it makes you super nervous and it might catch up with you in the long run. If you tell a lie and you end up getting the position, and then it comes to light that that wasn't true. All right. Don't provide wrong info. If it's difficult, you could again ask for some more time to think, or you could ask probing questions if you're not sure about the question that they ask. And this last one, sometimes there's no right answer. Again, could be a stress question, and they're just looking to see how you think and how you analyze different scenarios. Right? Basic takeaway: don't make anything up and don't lie. Couple things that employers cannot ask in an interview. These are all protected under the federal government. As you can see, they're married, where you're from, age, race, sexual orientation, arrest, all of that stuff. Might be different for the feds if you're trying to go into public service. You can't have a felony on your record, but there's a whole process to this. But I don't think you guys are going to run into this. I really haven't had any employers asking any students this. Maybe the small mom and pop shops or small businesses might not be as informed, and they might make the mistake of asking illegal questions. But the big companies like Medtronic, Boeing, Lockheed, Kimley Horn, they're not going to be asking you any illegal questions. And if you do get asked an illegal question, we just have some examples here of how you can respond. Or what the illegal versus illegal version, I'm sorry, what those questions look like. Always have questions for the interviewer. You never want to go into an interview and at the very end, they ask you, that's always the last question. Do you have any questions for us? Don't make the mistake of saying no. Everything was answered. Always have questions prepared ahead of time. Sometimes what happens is those questions get answered anyways during the course of the interview, so it wouldn't make sense to ask them again. But make sure, like I said, you're prepared. You have like a folder, a book, notes, and you're taking notes as the interview progresses, because there might be a couple of things that you could jot down that you could ask at the end. And just some questions there, some sample questions that you could ask. Always send a thank you interview. So whether it's the first round interview, phone, Skype, whatever, second round interview in person, if it's Skype again, after every interview for that same employer, make sure you send a thank you email to the people who, the panel. If it was just one person, that one person. And the main thing that you want to pitch in the thank you email is a standout moment that you felt you answered really well, and you got the impression from the employer that they were also impressed with your response. Just to remind them, because they'll forget, because you might be one of many candidates that they are interviewing for. Or are interviewing. So just make sure that's the thing. Don't have a whole paragraph. They're not going to read a whole thing. It should be very short and to the point. And this last one, make sure you thank them whether you get offered the position or not. Don't burn your bridges. It's all about networking and relationships, and you might never know what might come down the pipeline. You might get referred for another position, even if you didn't get offered for the position that you interviewed for. Here's an example. I would say, like, visually, that's how long it should be. I won't read through this, but I'll send you the PowerPoint like I mentioned earlier, so you'll have this to look at. And just in sum, know yourself, know the employer, do your research, professional attire. Make sure you have questions. You practice those first round interview questions, the behavioral with the STAR technique, have mock interviews. And the main thing is, as you practice more with actual interviews and also with a career advisor, you're not going to be nervous as much. It's still good to be a bit nervous because it helps keep you on your game. But the best way to excel at interviewing is to prepare and to practice. And we have about 5 minutes. That was my presentation. But if I could take any questions from you guys as it relates to interviewing or any other career-related topics, I'm happy to help you to answer those questions. One thing is I have an appointment at 2 p.m., so I have exactly 5 minutes to do some Q&A.
Yeah, I find it impressive that the STAR technique was mentioned, because I remember hearing that before, and it's very useful. You describe a situation, a task, an action, a result, and it very drives home to the employer what you've done.
Yeah, and the employers as well, the engineering employers, they know the STAR technique very well, so they're not going to be surprised that you are using it. Obviously, you're not going to be like, the situation was, the task was, the act. Keep it very fluid. They're going to know. Mentally, you're going to be using that technique in your head and transitioning from one part of it to the other. And the recruiter is also going to be doing the same thing, because just remember, they have a certain skill they're looking for, and you're just making it as easy for them to understand or to get a good, be confident that you have what they're looking for. So it's basically keeping you on track, and you're not going off the rails. You're not, getting confused, going around the block, and then you start getting super nervous because you're kind of all jumbled up. And then at the end of it, you're confused and the recruiter's confused. If the recruiter is nice, they might say, let's try that one more time, but sometimes they won't, and they'll just move on to the next question. Any other questions I could answer, guys?
Well, that was a great presentation. So unless there's no more further questions, then we'll see you on the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Joseph.
Sounds good. It's nice meeting everyone. And just I have this thing here. If any of you would like to book me for an appointment, or you have someone you want to refer who's not sure about their career or needs some help, I could help with that whole piece. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Have a great rest of your week, and have a good weekend. All right.
Thank you. You too.
Stay safe, everyone.